So I've stated before on this channel that I don't particularly like talking about Greek mythology. And it's not at all because I think it's a bad mythology or that it can't provide interesting video topics. Just wait for December. In a lot of ways, I'm thankful for how widespread and well-known the Greek mythos is, and how many people first got into mythology because of the Greek stories. But at the same time, I really hate that immediately upon making reference to mythology, the first thing which usually comes up in people's mind is Greece. If you were to go into another tab right now and search up mythology under Google, you'd find hundreds upon hundreds of channels and videos related to this very subject. Yet upon closer inspection, 95% of all of the content is focused on the Greek stuff. In fact, I'd be willing to wager that a majority of my audience didn't know the first thing about Armenian mythology until I did my video on it. This is by no means me claiming that I suddenly ignited people's curiosity with my video, nor am I suggesting that I'm the only person on this site to ever make a video on the subject, but you can see a very clear disparity between the representation of the two. Greek mythology doesn't need another know-it-all asshole to get up on his soapbox and tell you how great it is. I prefer to stick up for the little guy. In most cases. Today's topic definitely withholding. The Romans most certainly were not the little guys, unless we're going by comparisons in stature to the modern man. Sometimes I think it's easy for people to forget that one of the longest-lasting, most widespread empires in the history of the world was centered on a single city in the middle of a boot-shaped peninsula, and yet here we are. If you were to ask an American, European, or anyone else who hails from the Western world where the greatest influences upon society, politics, economy, and culture come from, barring those who are lying, stupid, or both, they'll most likely answer with either the Greeks or the Romans. Which, by the way, are both perfectly reasonable answers. Greece more or less grandfathers its way into relevance by being the biggest influence upon the Romans, and nowhere is this influence more directly apparent than in their architecture and mythology. Rome straight up plagiarized the Hades out of Greek mythology, hence why the two are seen as inseparable by most amateurs to mythology, and why when a lot of books make reference to the Greek gods, they also leave their Roman equivalents in as well. For this, you can thank the 9 planets for making their names so prominent. What? The fuck you mean Pluto isn't a planet anymore? This is also the reason why when my Discord member Hadrian II, you biased bastard, suggested I do a whole video on Roman syncretism, I had to say, nah. Now, while the majority of Greek mythology just got copied over with a few name changes and edited with a few small, inconsequential changes, because fuck if you think these hairy bastards didn't write their shit down, there were actually some original Roman elements added to the canon post-Trojan War. However, the lore added to the gods themselves can be described as menial at best, and for the most part, the mythological aspects were kind of fused into Rome's early history, not unlike the Japanese Nihon Shoki. However, before we proceed any further, it's important that we take a look at the actual historical accounts we have today as to the formulation of Rome. It all begins right around 1500 BC, when the Italic peoples began to settle onto the fertile Italian peninsula. Like most modern Italians, these hairy, greasy bastards liked their food quite a bit, and given the favorable conditions of the Mediterranean provided, they settled quite nicely into a livelihood of farming and playing whatever the fuck this is. However, like most peoples at the time, they were almost constantly at war with parties from the north seeking to take their land, rape their women, remember that one, and re-educate their children. Christ, is the English here already? So while the early Latins were busy trying to protect their northern borders from the Etruscans, some other colorful characters settled right beneath their noses. These were the Greek colonies known as Magna Graecia, and it is from here, and a little bit of the Etruscan influence, where the early Romans adopted many of the Greeks' cultural quirks as well as their pantheon of gods.
What about that shadowy place?
That's beyond our borders. You must never go there.
It's important to note, however, that a majority of the Roman influences came from the Magna Graecia and not from the Etruscans. However, they did do quite a bit of mating with the Etruscans. So you could say that culturally they were more similar to the Greeks, ethnically more similar to the Etruscans, and yet you know which legacy lives on in our modern world. But that's not the only thing Rome took from its neighbors. In the beginning, Rome was actually founded as a safe haven from the undesirables of Tuscany and Magna Graecia, kind of like Mos Eisley. Or Australia.
The dingo ate your baby. Ugh.
This led to a massive boom in the population, and with the city sitting by the Tiber River, was a hub for trade between the Greeks and the Etruscans, which brought economic prosperity to the city. From there, it's not too hard to understand how they were able to build a republic, kick out all their rivals from Italy, then expand outwards into Gaul. Then that one guy got stabbed, then his nephew and last-minute adoptive son took over, blah blah blah, the first principate, blah blah blah, Roman Empire, blah blah blah, pizza basta alabasta. This isn't a history channel, though I will be referring back to Roman history from time to time, drawing parallels between the real-world accounts and what the early Roman historians might want you to believe. In fact, let's meet one of them straight away. Virgil, that one guy who served as Dante's companion through hell in Inferno, and yes, I'm well aware that I've just made someone's panties very sodden with the excitement at the mere mention of that story in one of these videos, but let me be clear, I am not covering the Divine Comedy on this channel. Yet. Anyway, around 30 BC, Caesar Augustus, yes, that Caesar Augustus, commissioned the poet Virgil to write a history of Rome and frame it as a continuation to the Iliad and the Odyssey. This work of fiction would be known as the Aeneid and follow the Trojan hero Aeneas as he flees from his home because it had a sudden infestation problem. Except instead of eating your food and chewing your cables, this infestation burns your homes, rapes your women, again, coming back to that, and tosses your babies. Christ, is the Imperial Army of Japan here already? Now, like many of the myths that we are going to be covering here today, there may be a hint of truth to the conflict, as the ruins of what scholars think is previously the lost city of Troy do show signs of a massive fire destroying the whole city sometime between 3000 and 1200 BC, which lines up pretty close with the story of the Iliad, minus a few choice exaggerations. Anyway, the Aeneid happens from there, and if you want a more detailed summary recounting that whole tale, I'd recommend you all go check out OSP's video on the subject, as doing so myself would effectively be writing a script within a script. All you really need to know is that Aeneas makes it to Italy from what is now modern-day Turkey, and starts his own city called Lavinium, named for his final wife, Lavinia, and then their son founded another city called Alba Longa. Several generations of kings come and go until eventually we land on these two goobers, brothers who jointly reign over the city of Alba Longa. The first and elder brother is named Numitor, no relation to numbers, who was the lawmaker, and the younger brother was named Amulius, who was in charge of the city's military. Now, technically, Numitor was in charge of the entire city, but Amulius had the advantage of commanding the military, so yeah, he overthrew and imprisoned his own brother, killed all his nephews, and then forced Numitor's one and only daughter to become an equivalent of a modern-day nun, known in those days as a Vestal Virgin. As a quick aside, the Vestal Virgins were a group of women who swore an oath of chastity and were tasked with constantly keeping the flame in the local temple of Vesta, goddess of the hearth and Roman counterpart to the Greek Hestia, who also happened to be a virgin. Girls sworn to this life of religious chastity had to keep up this gig for around 30 years, which, given life expectancy around that time, was a much bigger deal than it sounds. And never ever bump uglies with anyone, otherwise the punishment is imprisonment until you starve to death. Either that or a good old-fashioned stoning. Christ, is Sharia law here already? Now trust me, these jokes aren't running out anytime soon. Anyway, getting back to our story, Amulius' plan sounds good on paper, though evidently he never heard of Danae. Otherwise, he would have set out some other jailbait aged girls to distract any gods looking for divine intervention. If you know what I mean rape. Like, 90% of the time it's rape. Rhea, the aforementioned daughter of Numitor, was raped by the Roman god of war Mars, who is of course the counterpart to Thank you, Kratos. Anyway, after Rhea is impregnated with the children of Mars, she hides her shame until it is time for her to give birth to her twin sons, Remus and Romulus. Fearing that these boys would supersede his rule, Amulius decided that a good old-fashioned baby tossing was in order, and cast both children into the Tiber River.
Oh, these babies are so cute.
Rhea Silvia, what is this?
Nothing.
You whore! I'll have to kill you for this!
No, you can't do that.
However, this is not where our young hero's stories end, as the goddess of the Tiber River takes pity on the infants and washes them on the shore safe and sound until they are found by a mother wolf who provides them with sustenance and provides us with imagery like this. Which I'm sure is doing something for the loins of at least a couple of you fucks watching this video right now. The boys were then picked up and raised by a passing shepherd named Faustulus and his wife Acca Larentia, where they lived out a typical countryside childhood, becoming farmhand workers until... Hey, what's up? So, I'm your dad. King Amulius is your great uncle. He killed your mom and also broke my stereo last week. So, I'm gonna need you kids to murder his ass and reinstate Numitor, okay? Alright, I gotta go. I've got another call on the line. Some bald guy wanting me to vanquish his enemies or some shit. Alright, see ya.
What the fuck was that?
And so the boys began to plan their coup, rallying together an army of farm workers armed with pitchforks and other shit, and somehow this ragtag group led by two teenagers defeated Amulius's trained army, stormed the city, and killed the king. Alright, to be fair, I never said Alba Longa was a great city. And supposedly, the boys got bored of it too relatively quickly. As soon as Numitor was reinstated, they fucked off to go found their own city, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. Also voter fraud. Nah, I'm just kidding. Romulus speared his brother to death over a disagreement over which piece of real estate they should build on. No, seriously, that's the legit reason that we're given. Remus liked one of the hills better, so Romulus just ran him through.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
Anyway, Romulus named his new city, wait for it, Rome! Yay! It's in the title of the video! And things went pretty well for Romulus and the boys until one day one of them wised up and realized that living in close quarters with a bunch of sweaty, muscular, hairy, greasy Italian men in a totally non-homoerotic setting wasn't really producing them any heirs to carry on their legacy. So, in an effort to save his young kingdom, Romulus rode out into neighboring lands asking if they could spare a cup of pussy. However, their closest neighbors, the Sabines, didn't take too kindly to them there Roman folk coming into their country and trying to take their women. It was then that the Romans changed their tactics up a little bit and invited the Sabines to a festival in the honor of the god of the ocean, Neptune. Or as he is known in Greece, Poseidon. The Sabines showed up and they ate, drank, played games, and engaged in other festivous activities. However, the whole thing was a massive farce. For as soon as Romulus gave the signal by taking off his robe, folding it, and then putting it back on, the rape of the Sabines began. Now it's important to note here that rape is not used in its traditional context here, as the word the Romans used to describe the event is raptio, which means abduction or kidnapping or something along those lines. In fact, the Roman historian Livy, the one who wrote all of this shit, explicitly states that there was no kind of sexual assault inflicted upon the women captured by the Romans, and in fact, Romulus met with each and every one of them personally and offered them civic and property rights if they were to take the Romans on as husbands. According to the legend, only one of the women was not a virgin because I guess the Romans were just obsessed with who is and who isn't a virgin, and that was Hersilia, who was already married, and yet Romulus being Romulus took her as his personal trophy wife anyway. Of course, the Sabines weren't about to take this abuse line down and declared all-out war against the Romans. Yet the conflict was quickly snuffed out when the captive women came onto the battlefield and threw themselves between their captor husbands and fathers, demanding a stop to the fighting and a unification between the two nations. This overly dramatic display somehow worked, and the Roman and Sabine people unified under one kingdom with joint rulers until the Sabine king mysteriously died a few years later. But by this point, everyone was basically having a massive orgy anyway, so nobody really noticed. And so the Kingdom of Rome flourished, increasing in size, structure, and hair, just like a teenage boy's willy. Eventually, the Romans got awfully cozy with the Etruscans to their north, as the last 3 of the 7 kings of Rome each hailed from Etruscan lineage. However, some of you may have just noticed that I said last of, and that's for good reason. So the last king of Rome was a guy by the name of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, who was also known as Tarquin the Proud. If you're like me and instantly thought of Grand Moff Tarquin, and whether or not the character was inspired by the king, it's entirely possible. However, George Lucas has never made any statement on that matter, but I won't say anything if you try to impress your D&D group by saying that he is. Anyhow, the fall of Rome as a kingdom came when all of the generals in the army of Rome were away at war somewhere off in the countryside, when one of them wondered out loud whether or not their wives were being faithful to them back home. So the whole army decides to haul ass back home just to see what their wives were up to. This war must have been really fucking boring. Upon reconvening in the city, they find that not a single woman wasn't having an affair with some other man who stayed behind except for Lucretia, wife of Collatinus, consul to the king. Collatinus was relieved, though Sextus, the son of the king, presumably overtaken by jealousy, confronted Lucretia and offered her an ultimatum. Either she sleep with him, or he would kill her and a slave and leave them in the same bed together, making it look as though this noblewoman had been sleeping around with the, help. Lucretia submits herself to him, but then sends word of what happened to her husband, and then stabbed herself out of shame. Collatinus demanded collateral for his deceased wife, yet the king wasn't so privy to send his son and successor to the throne off to a dungeon somewhere, so Collatinus took matters into his own hands. He then said, and pardon my French, "Baiser de monarchie," and thus the Roman Republic was born. And from that point onward, we're getting out of the weeds of mythology and bleeding into actual history, so my job is done here. However, if you did like what you saw here today, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content such as this. I do have a Patreon where $5 patrons gain access to the Discord moderation privileges as well as my series Academic Ayakashi Archive. And if you'd like to be a part of the same Discord community which inspired this video, link is in the description down below. And with all that being said, thank you all so very much for watching today's video, and here's wishing you all a God's blessed day.